We have already participants in the session. We're going to give them around 1 minute to join. In the meantime, today we're going to talk about generative artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. My name is Leslie Lopez. I'm a director at the Peruvian-Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your host today. Our conversation will be focused on risks and opportunities in higher education. So, to start, I'm having some trouble moving. Perfect. We're going to explain a little bit about accessibility for everyone. Most of the attendees are Spanish speakers. Okay, so the slides will have mostly 2 languages. On the left, English, on the right, Spanish. For Spanish speakers, for English speakers, the conversation will be in English. The slides will be in both languages. The questions can be done in the Q&A section of at the bottom menu. And for Spanish speakers, en el chat de su Zoom podrán encontrar las instrucciones para activar los subtítulos. Actívenlos para poder leer en inglés. Los slides estarán en español en la parte derecha de su pantalla. Sus preguntas las pueden ingresar en la sección de Q&A en el menú inferior de su pantalla. Y si se sienten más cómodos, pueden hacer sus preguntas en español y nosotras las vamos a traducir. Perfect. So, let's start with our introduction. Oops, I have a technical issue here. In recent months, we have experienced AI hype. The term artificial intelligence has been used everywhere, especially in professional and business networks. Generative AI is a powerful technology that has the potential to change the way we work, the way we teach, learn, and do many other activities. Its creators and researchers, such as Turing Award winners Geoffrey Hinton, Joshua Bengio, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis, and professors from UC Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT are calling for discussions to build consensus on the main risks that governments and organizations need to focus on to ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly. In this event, PCC aims to create awareness about AI, generative AI, their benefits, risks, and especially how to mitigate them. Because education is the foundation of civilized and modern society, discussing these topics with educators is a good place to start. With that, let me introduce you to our guests, experts in AI, education, and ethics. Willem Dick. Will has had a front row seat in the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Working as a data scientist for the past decade and a half, he has had a hand in building hundreds of AI models. Models that have helped determine everything from what ads people see to billion-dollar investment decisions, who gets hired and who gets fired. He's currently the president of CVM Data Sciences and is a professor at Seneca College in Toronto. Welcome, Professor William. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your time. We also invited Dr. Amir Ghazinoori. Dr. Amir is a professor of business studies and organizational consultant. Amir teaches strategy, business ethics, and privacy at York University, Seneca Polytechnic, and Centennial College. His teaching and research focus on areas of organizational theory, decision-making, managerial ideas such as corporate social responsibility and sustainability. Amir is also an alumnus of the University of New South Wales, where he obtained a Ph.D. in management, the University of Nottingham, where he obtained an MBA, Monash University, where he studied commerce, and IAU, where he studied industrial engineering. Welcome, Professor Amir. Also a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, Leslie.
We'll talk today about what is AI, what is the difference with generative AI, and what is ChatGPT, how ChatGPT is being used in education, and what are the risks that it poses. Especially, we're going to focus on how to mitigate them. Finally, we're going to close our conversation with knowing a little bit more of what is next for artificial intelligence. And to start the discussion, we're going to have a poll so we can understand what is the experience of the audience with AI. So let's launch the poll. You can see it now in your screen. We're going to have about 1 minute to start a poll, to do the poll. Maybe Sergio can tell me if we are having people vote, because I cannot see the results yet.
Yeah, we have 85% response, and everyone responds less than a year.
Okay, that gives us a good idea of how we have to focus the talk. Okay, I think we can stop the poll now. Interesting. So most of the audience said that they have less than a year using AI. So we'll start with the expert in AI, Professor Will. Would you tell us more about the AI models that you and your team have developed and how they are used in people's daily lives?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll just start by talking about the poll results. I think it's really interesting that most people think that they've only been using AI for less than a year. I think that depending on how we define what AI is, I think a lot of people have probably been using elements of AI throughout their whole life. 50, 60 years ago, a calculator would have been considered artificial intelligence. And then a chess machine was considered artificial intelligence. A computer that could play chess would have been considered artificial intelligence in the 80s. And so as we sort of get our computers to become more and more powerful, our notion of what AI is, tends to evolve. And so we can think of AI as something that's off in the future, it's things that we don't know how to do, but very often the things that we use our computers to do every day are things that we would have considered AI very recently in the past. And to give an example of how AI models are used in your daily lives, every time you go on to Twitter or Facebook, the content that you're seeing in your newsfeed is being, not written by AI, but the selection of what you see is driven by AI. When you go to Amazon and you look at product recommendations, those are driven by AI. When you go to YouTube and see what the video recommendations are, those are driven by AI. Your email inbox, the spam filter in your email, that's AI. If you apply for a job nowadays, most likely there's an AI that's going through your resume and deciding whether or not your resume is spam or whether or not it should be elevated and shown to a human for further analysis. So I think most people are actually using AI quite frequently throughout their lives. They might not be building the models, they might not be aware of it, but it's actually getting a lot of use. The models that we tend to build are used by large companies to make decisions, primarily for marketers to do things like decide which people to, or which customers to target, how much money, what products to show them, how to show them that product, whether it's a social media ad, whether it's an email, a telephone call, what creative to associate with that. Do you like to look at pictures of cats, or do you like to look at attractive models, or do you want a picture of the product itself? What time of day to send that message, etc. So a lot of it is about sort of trying to optimize marketing. And we've also done work with, as you mentioned in the introduction, financial teams, HR teams, to build models to really automate and help companies make decisions at a very large scale.
Interesting, Professor. So to get a little bit more into the technology itself, in simple terms, can you describe AI? I mean, what do we need to create AI? Or what do these machines that we use every day through Facebook, through Twitter, through Netflix, through Amazon, what do they need from us and how do they work?
Yeah, so as I said before, AI is really the task of trying to, AI stands for artificial intelligence, of course, and it's the task of trying to build a machine that is intelligent. And we have been doing this for about a century now as humans. And as I mentioned, along the way, we've often set goals, and we've said, if we could build a machine that could do math for us, that would be intelligent, that would be artificial intelligence. And we do that and we think, well, it's not really intelligence anymore. And we think, well, what if a machine could, play chess for us? We think, well, that would be a real something that was really intelligent. And we get to that point and we think, maybe it's not that intelligent. And so there's kind of this conception of AI as something that's actually intelligent. And we tend to, when we get to that point of intelligence, we tend to think, well, maybe that isn't exactly what we wanted. The type of AI that we talk about today is often a specific sort of form of AI, which is called machine learning. So an approach to AI, and it's a statistical approach to artificial intelligence, and is essentially a modification of the simple linear regression. Most of you probably are familiar with a linear regression. You take two variables, you use one variable to predict some other variable, right? You take someone's weight and use that to predict their height, for example, or their age, of a child, and use that to predict their weight. And we can expand that linear regression with that single variable linear regression to have multiple variables, a lot of different variables. Instead of drawing a straight line through our data, we can start to draw curves and more complicated shapes. And machine learning is really about taking that to the to the maximum degree, about taking some input data and some output data that we want to predict and developing an incredibly complex mathematical equation that links our input data to our output data. So we take some training data, some input training data, some output training data. We train our model the same way if we were to plot that data, with a simple linear regression case, we just plot our variables on a graph and kind of draw a line through it. Well, we're basically doing that, except now we've got, millions of input data and some complex output data, and we're drawing a really complex shape through that data. But in all cases, we're making some prediction at the end. And when we, train our model on our training data, at the end of the day, we can take new input data where we don't already have an output, and we can use the model to generate our output. The models that people are really excited about now, large language models like ChatGPT, all they do is actually predict whether or not, or they predict the next word in a sentence. So we take, all of the writing in the world that we have that's digitized, and we train this model to predict what the next word will be. And it turns out that when we do that and we ask it a question, it's able to, predict what our answer is, what answer we want to see.
Professor, that's very interesting. And the next question I have, it would be like, let's say we are watching Netflix. So how does this recommendation system that recommends movies to us gets the data? Who gives the data? Who creates the data?
Well, it often it's based on users, right? So millions of users are interacting with Netflix on a daily basis, and we're indicating what we like. And so if I watch a movie on Netflix, Netflix is going to look at other people who have watched that same movie and look at what they also watched and recommend those movies to me.
Perfect. So the user is the one that generates the data, correct? The same happens in social media platforms or even in banking institutions when we use products and we decide certain specifications for our products, correct? So the question that I want to ask you now, it's a little bit more philosophical. It's like, are these machines making the decisions for us, or they are helping us make the decision?
Well, I would say that they're helping us make the decision, but I think it's very important to recognize that sometimes people put too much emphasis on the decisions that the machines make. So I think it's really important as users of these tools that we understand how they work and understand that there are limitations. I think for me, the HR example is the perfect example because it has such a big impact on people's lives, right? The idea that hiring and firing decisions are being made by a machine. And I think that on the one hand, those algorithms can help us make decisions, but there is sometimes a tendency for people that don't really understand how these things work and maybe have an over-optimistic view about how quote unquote intelligent they are to sort of hand off their responsibility to those algorithms. And I think that's where the biggest danger comes. And so I think we have a responsibility to use these tools intelligently. We have to really kind of bring the intelligence and the responsibility to these tools.
Yeah, and my question was directed because the purpose of this conversation is to make people aware of what is AI, how do they interact daily with it, and make them understand that these are machines that run with statistics and mathematical algorithms, and that we don't necessarily need to accept all of what we get through social media, through Netflix, Amazon, right? So that's what I want to bring conscience about. And to talk about benefits of AI, there are multiple uses for it in different techniques that are using machine learning, right? So can you talk about a little bit of the benefits that are currently being used in society? And if you can add the benefits that generative AI would bring.
Sure. I mean, it looks like you have a lot that are listed here. Increased productivity in general, things like predicting weather and floods, predicting, being able to design vaccines, being able to do better healthcare diagnosis. There's no question that AI, when used effectively, is incredibly, raises our productivity. And we often spend a lot of time thinking about AI in social media companies and in culture, Netflix. But of course, where it's the most powerful in terms of actually improving our lives tends to be in these particular, these areas that we don't always think about it, designing drugs, predicting natural disasters, and things like that.
Right, areas where the data that is needed to predict is huge, is so large that human beings cannot process that data, right? And so, for example, to understand the DNA sequencing of viruses, so we really need to use computers to analyze that data, right? To analyze the sequence of the DNA of these viruses or bacteria or anything. So as you said, I believe that an impactful application of AI would be in the science fields, correct?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about generative AI. So you explain us what is AI. What is the difference with generative AI? And
Yeah,
why
so generative.
such a hype recently?
Sure. So generative AI really just applies to any kind of AI or machine learning model that's used to generate an image or text or some sort of thing that kind of really to generate something that's unstructured. And we're primarily seeing two examples of that. One is large language models like ChatGPT that are able to generate text from a text prompt and basically have a conversation with you. And the other are image generation models. Models that generate an image based on a text prompt. So, draw me a picture of a flower, and it will draw me a picture of a flower. We also have music generation models, and movie generation models are something that people are working on as well. I think a lot of it is that it just was a big surprise how well these worked. 10 years ago, we just didn't realize that we were this close to these. And I think particularly ChatGPT and large language models are really hyped because they are kind of, when you first use them, you can sort of get tricked into thinking you're talking to a human, right? It's very uncanny. The image generation models are pretty cool, but very quickly you think, well, okay, this is just a computer doing it. But there's something about language that's probably the most human characteristic. We're the only animals that really have complex language, and to talk to someone is really a very human thing. And so to have a machine talk to you in your native language is quite unnerving, and it really makes you think that maybe that machine is actually intelligent.
Yeah, exactly. So today, for example, I use ChatGPT to do the translations in Spanish, and I did very quickly with very minor mistakes. So it's impressive how productive you can be using it. But as you said, always keeping control of what we are creating with this tool and proofreading and seeing that it's actually saying something coherent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so you explained already that ChatGPT is a large language model and what the outputs are. So you explained that ChatGPT predicts the next word in a sentence, correct? So elaborating on that, is the content of ChatGPT a fact all the time? Is not. What do you think? Or can you explain us what it would be?
Well, yeah, so the ChatGPT doesn't know anything. It predicts what the next word in a string of words is, right? And then it predicts the next word in a sentence. So if you ask it, is the sky blue? It will probably tell you yes. But it doesn't know that the sky is blue. It just knows that 99% of the time when that question was asked on the internet, the answer was yes, right? And so, and very often you can ask, if you ask a question that isn't commonly seen on the internet, very often you will get something that might seem like a reasonable answer, but isn't. There's the famous example now of a lawyer who asked ChatGPT to provide case law to support some legal argument and actually used that in a brief to the judge. And when the judge asked to see that, said, hey, I can't find these cases anywhere, can you provide cases? Then the lawyer realized that they had just been made up. ChatGPT had just made them up. There's also stories about people, prominent people will type in a bio, ask ChatGPT for a bio. And often the bio will sound plausible, but it will, get the school they went to wrong or get their employer wrong. It might have some details that are correct, the industry that they're in, but it will overall get a lot of facts wrong. And so, yeah, it's really important to understand that these models don't really know what they're saying. They're just predicting what the next word will be.
Perfect, Professor. So in that sense, you use a keyword here, internet, right? So these models have used data from the internet without being filtered to, be trained, and based on that is how they create the output, the sentences, the text. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but first I want to see if we have any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to see if anybody has any questions or open the floor for any questions. Nobody has questions there? If you raise your hand too, I am able to, or we are able to let you use a microphone, unmute you. Nope. Oh, one question. From Giovanni Lucero. Which is the reason why many CEOs of some technology firms are asking not to massify the use of artificial intelligence models? We're going to answer that question, but Professor, maybe you can start answering that.
Sorry, what was the question?
It's in the Q&A. It's saying, and let me share the screen again so you can see it as well. The question is, which is the reason why many CEOs of some technology firms are asking not to massify the use of artificial intelligence models? First, the artificial intelligence models are already massified, correct? So ChatGPT has been open in tens of countries all over the world, in tens of languages. And not even that, OpenAI has published the code and is allowing the programmers to play with it so they can contribute and enhance the machine learning algorithms. So I think this question is more related about the letters that were written for the scientists a couple of months ago. Maybe you can explain something about it.
Yeah, there's some prominent people that have, sort of raised some concern about these models. They're now becoming incredibly, they're now sort of open sourced, and the technology is out in the open. But there were some people that were hoping that that we could put sort of contain these models and not put them into the public sphere because they can be dangerous is the thinking. And the primary danger really is spam and fake news, right? The danger is that you can use these models to generate fake news stories. You can use it to, you put this onto a voice synthesizer, and you can go and you can call up people and try to scam them out of their credit card information. You can use this in a lot of very destructive ways, is the thinking. And there's also some idea that these models could get incredibly intelligent. Anyone who's seen the new Mission Impossible movie, there's like an out of the control AI that just like is able to this entity that has like immense power and is trying to take over the world. And you can sort of imagine that the more sort of sci-fi version is that potentially in the next year or two, we end up with superhuman intelligence that could potentially, pose a risk to humanity. It could be sort of an alien an intelligence that wants to destroy us, and that's so much smarter than us, can outthink us so well that it will, basically cause humanity to cease to exist. That's kind of the more extreme version of the risk.
Perfect. So we're going to move on, and we're going to answer the next questions in the next section, just for to be able to finish the topics. So we're going to look at a video about the risks.
Write a short introduction for Geoffrey Hinton, the subject of this video. Geoffrey Hinton is a University of Toronto professor emeritus who is known as the godfather of AI. He recently left Google so he could more freely discuss the dangers posed by unchecked AI development. We spoke to him in his London home about the technology he helped create, its many benefits, and why he suddenly fears humanity is at risk.
I've been given a number of interviews in which you've said that digital intelligence that is used by chatbots and other generative AI may be a better kind of intelligence than the biological intelligence that we have. Can you briefly explain what made you come to this conclusion? So, in a digital computer, it's designed so you can tell it exactly what to do, and it'll do exactly what you tell it. And even when it's learning stuff, two different digital computers can do exactly the same thing with the same learned knowledge. And that means that you could make 10,000 copies of the same knowledge, have them all running on different computers. And whenever one copy learns something, it can communicate it very efficiently to all the other copies. So you can have 10,000 digital agents out there, a kind of hive mind, and they can share knowledge extremely efficiently by just sharing the connection strengths inside the neural nets. And we can't do that. If you learn something and you want to tell me about it, you have to use sentences or pictures, and you can only share a very limited amount of information that way. So it's much, much slower for you to communicate what you've learned to me than it is for these digital intelligences.
So I think that talks about the power of these digital intelligence, right? Our automated machines, correct? And so from that, we can talk about the risks that we are facing with ChatGPT. Even OpenAI has posted in their website a fact page in pitfalls about ChatGPT, so people can be aware of what are the outputs that they can have, and that it is not an exact, or the accuracy of the model is not always 100%. So the limitations are may occasionally generate incorrect information, may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content, and it has a limited knowledge of the world and events after 2021. They are not talking about other risks like data privacy risks, but it's always good to be aware of these and always read the fact pages of these tools to understand what are the pitfalls, and also see what are the tips that they are recommending to you, right? So even in the fact page, you can go to settings and deactivate the chat history. So your data, your private data, that it doesn't get used, doesn't become part of the data set that is going to generate answers for other people. So with that, I'll move to talk about
who's been paying attention for
common
the last
uses.
few months has been seeing headlines like this, especially in education. The thesis has been students are going to be using ChatGPT and other forms of AI to cheat, do their assignments, they're not going to learn, and it's going to completely undermine education as we know it. Now, what I'm going to argue today is not only are there ways to mitigate all of that, if we put the right guardrails, we do the right things, we can mitigate it, but I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor.
So what do you
Who's
think?
been paying attention?
That's what is coming for education. So Professor Amir, what do you think? There has been journalists writing about the pitfalls of using artificial intelligence in education, right? And there was one article by Natasha Singer explaining that rather than help education, it would undermine it, that it would encourage students to cheat. It would not allow students to form critical thinking, right? So I would like to know your opinion on this.
See, saying that it is going to be a transformation or evolution, I would say it's going to be revolution more than evolution or even transformation. I mean, if you go back 2-3 decades ago and having the phenomenon of internet and think about that, and going back to the education on that time, still we can talk about that major transformation that we were all part of that without even realizing it. So that's what's happening. Of course, this is going to change everything. And it is, as Will was explaining it, it's a long time that we are actually in the path of changing and thinking about this stuff. So it's not a new thing. What the article is actually talking about, saying that this is going to have, these negative kind of outcomes. This is the case for any type of technology. I think you can talk about consequences, of course, as much as you can see, develop scenarios, the positive side, but on the other hand, the negative ones. What the article is saying makes sense, but it's not necessarily what's going to happen. I mean, this is just the scenario of what we think that might happen, of course, but there can be many other consequences to this. And the interesting thing about technology is that you don't know. I mean, if we could actually see what's going to happen, then the name was not innovation, the name was not creativity. So the thing is, there are going to be many unintended consequences. And what she's trying actually to say in this article is that there are going to be many shady areas, gray areas that we might actually end up using artificial intelligence. For example, what people were thinking about Google effect many years ago, that, hey, searching everything is going to make our children stupid, because whatever actually they want to do, they are going to search it instead of, trying to find it. Yeah, that can be the case. But that's not going to drive the area, and we saying that Google is a bad thing or internet was a bad thing. So
Right.
of course there are going to be many consequences, and this can be one of them, or maybe a small percentage of that.
Perhaps it depends on the tool, right? Like every car, there are good cars, bad cars. Like maybe ChatGPT, we have to think about the fact that maybe ChatGPT is not the right tool for a school, for education.
Again, that's something, I was in another talk a few days back, and it is still interesting that even some people in the field, they think that, now the question is either to use, generative AI or not to use it, or shall we prevent this technology? You can't. I mean, this is the wave which is coming, and you want it or you don't want it, you're going to face it. So it's not that you're going to stop it. There's no way. So we can do a few things, being prepared, start surfing on it, or being prepared to somehow protect ourselves, or maybe using it for other things. So the question is not either we need to use it or not to use it. The question is how to use
How
it.
to use it. I agree.
So that conversation, I think, is gone a long time ago, and I'm kind of surprised that there's still some people think that this is a question either to use it or not to use it. When something is there, I don't even have the right to tell you or anyone else to use it or not to use it. When there is a capability, when there is a possibility, this is actually, from the ethical perspective, your right to use it. But now the question is how, just that.
Right. And how about the idea of using it for tutoring and teaching? Do you think, because there's a group of people that think that this is going to create huge job displacement?
Mm-hmm.
You think it's going to create job displacement in the education world?
Okay, that's also a very relevant question that many people are asking, and that's usually coming from our fear from the development of these kind of technologies. The answer is both yes and no. If you think about the general rate of employment and unemployment, just like internet, computer, or any other technology that we had before, this is not going to impact the rate of employment, saying that this is going to make us sit at home and do nothing and have no job to do. So nothing in that area. However, at the same time, there are going to be many areas being impacted by this. And of course, that era of someone repeating something from the textbook, from general knowledge, that era is kind of gone. And yes, there are going to be some jobs kind of irrelevant to the market. And that's not only about tutoring and teaching. The other day, I was talking with someone who had education in paralegal. As a paralegal, now you have AI supported, softwares that are doing the job of a paralegal much better than a person who studied the subject.
Yep.
So if you actually look at that area, saying that jobs are kind of changing, but doesn't mean that we're not going to have other jobs to do. So generally speaking, some areas, of course, are going to be impacted, and tutoring, teaching is one of those areas. Yes.
Got you. Very interesting perspective, Professor. So we're going to move to watch a video about the technology that is already being used in the United States.
Especially in education. The thesis has been to mitigate all of that. If we put the right guardrails, we do the right things, we can mitigate it. But I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor. And we're going to give every teacher on the planet an amazing artificially intelligent teaching assistant. I'm going to show you the early stages of what our AI, which we call Conmigo, what it can now do, and maybe a little bit of where it is actually going. It is not a cheating tool. Notice, when the student says, tell me the answer, it says, I'm your tutor. What do you think is the next step for solving the problem? Now, if the student makes a mistake, not only does it notice the mistake, it asks the student to explain their reasoning. But it's actually doing what I would say not just even an average tutor would do, but an excellent tutor would do. And it's not just in math. This is a computer programming exercise on Khan Academy where the student needs to make the clouds part. And so we can see the student starts defining a variable, left x minus minus. It only made the left cloud part, but then they can ask Conmigo, what's going on? Why is only the left cloud moving? And it understands the code. It knows all the context of what the student is doing. And it understands that those ellipses are there to draw clouds, which I think is kind of mind-blowing. And it says, to make the right cloud move as well, try adding a line of code inside the draw function that increments the right x variable by 1 pixel in each frame. Even when I'm tutoring my kids, when they're learning to code, I can't help them this well, this fast. This is really going to be a super tutor. And it's not just exercises, it understands what you're watching. It understands the context of your video. It can answer the age-old question, why do I need to learn this? And it asks Socratically, well, what do you care about? And let's say the student says, I want to be a professional athlete. And it says, well, learning about the size of cells, which is what this video is about, that could be really useful for understanding nutrition and how your body works, etc. It can answer.
So this is a great example of how AI is being used responsibly. In the United States, Khan Academy is already running pilots in New Jersey with public schools. Also, we know this app, I don't know if you have children and use the app for Khan Academy also is generated by AI. So I think we have covered much of this conversation about tutoring, about job displacement. So it also entails job displacement of programmers, right? That they can now be assisted by ChatGPT and other AI and make their work more productive. As Professor Amir said, instead of creating a massive displacement, probably doing the job more productively is going to require them to have a different type of skill, like prompt engineering. And Professor, would like your opinion about that.
Yeah, I mean, so about coding specifically that you have on the slide there, I think in the software development industry, I think that what we've seen so far is that a lot of programmers have used ChatGPT to improve their coding. ChatGPT, there's also Copilot by GitHub's Copilot, and a number of other products out there. And I think we've seen that it is making developers more efficient, but it's also, I think, at this time, it's clear that it's not in no position to replace those programmers. And I personally, I am skeptical that it could ever do so, or at least not in the, not in the next decade or two. Who knows? You never know. But the reality is, if the reality is that right now these models just aren't as smart as humans. They're just not as talented as humans, and so they can be very good at giving us quick answers to questions. And it's sort of, you think about it like a lot of programmers, when they're working on a new project, they want to know how to do something that's already really well understood. But because they're using a language they're not familiar with, or they're in a domain that they're not that familiar with, they don't know what the best practices are. And they don't necessarily have a great place to look that up. Right now, you might go to Google and try to find some resources online. Well, ChatGPT sort of synthesizes that information for you. And so it ends up being a good resource for making your coding more efficient, but it's not really going to replace your job as a coder, I would say.
Perfect. So let's talk about academic research really briefly, because we already touched on it. The fact that ChatGPT has these hallucinations and doesn't really give you real information all the time, right? So there have been some lawsuits about this because there was another lawyer, a radio host that found out that ChatGPT defamed him, saying that he has been embezzling money, right? So this was the first defamation suit against OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT. So just as an example of how we have to check for the results that we are getting. And also, we'll talk about it in the next slide, right? Professor Amir. So we already talked about this. I can re-ask you, would you recommend using ChatGPT for academic research? Let's ask you better, how would you mitigate this type of hallucinations from ChatGPT? Mm-hmm. And the second question I would ask you is Grammarly, Grammarly, the software that you use to make sure that your writing has the great grammar, is recommending to start citing text from ChatGPT using the API citations. Mm-hmm. Would you consider that as a professor that you receive homework from students? Would you consider that a proper source?
Okay. See, again, as we'll explain, as regarding the sources, the OpenAI is just taking information from other places. And that's maybe one of the reasons that all of those giant figures in this area are calling about a pause on the development and usage of this, because we are still not really clear about how the ChatGPT can actually take care of the privacy of that information that it's using, or if there is going to be any kind of framework for that. So if you're asking if I'm going to recommend using that for assignments and homeworks, that's of course the plan. That's what we need to do. Otherwise, we cannot really do anything about using it by students. But the thing is, most of the time we are not really clear about what to do. So we are lacking as education, even in this country, regarding these kind of advances that we have. We need to have some kind of innovative ways, asking the students to do assignments using these kind of platforms. We need more creativity and more ways to shape it. But this is just shaping. I mean, we are at the very beginning of something extremely big, and we are just trying to figure out. But yes, of course, we need to do that. There are going to be so many risks. Again, we don't know what's going to happen or what would be the behavior of people. I think before all of these things, not only about, courses of ethics or anything else, we need to have this component of integrity, how to use AI and how to have originality, even using that. I think we need to come up with courses across all courses that people are doing, maybe components that the students understand this stuff, having that education from the beginning, and then use it instead of, so we cannot mitigate any risk. It's just that we can train people to use it in a right way.
Right, and create the frameworks to use it.
Yes, of course. And again, Grammarly, as you said, as an example, that might be a good one. So Grammarly is doing the right thing. It's just that OpenAI also should have that kind of option to provide those sources that have been used. I don't know if that's from the technology perspective possible at the moment or not, or if there is going to be any way to do that, but that's obviously something that we need to pay attention.
I think the problem is that the data that ChatGPT is using is the data available on the internet, right? And we have all sorts of things in the internet. It's not filtered. The good and the bad is in there. So this goes to Professor Will. So Professor Will, is there any work around this fact, and what is causing these hallucinations? Is the data only, or is also the algorithm? And can this be fixed?
Well, again, ChatGPT doesn't think the way that humans think. So when you ask it a question, it doesn't go look up the answer in an encyclopedia or something. It just makes stuff up, and it gives you what it thinks you want. And so sometimes that works well, but most of the time it doesn't work perfectly. And that's just the reality. And there's examples where Amir was talking about it would be great if ChatGPT gave sources. Well, a lot of the times people will ask ChatGPT to provide them with sources, and it will just make up sources, right? It will say, oh, wait, I got this from the Wall Street Journal on this random date. And it'll just make up a date because it's not thinking. It doesn't think, at least not the way that humans think. It's just sort of guessing what the next word will be. You might have seen this sometimes in a classroom with a student that doesn't really know the material, but can put some words together to sort of fake it a little bit. But if you ask them enough questions, you realize they just have no idea what they're talking about, the topic is. And that's kind of what ChatGPT is doing. So it's sort of, and there's lots of work around trying to address this problem, because obviously, and I think one of the biggest problems is that a lot of people, I would say OpenAI actually really is sort of promising ChatGPT or selling ChatGPT as a tool to do a bunch of things that it really doesn't do. It really just doesn't know anything about the world, and it really can't do a lot of the things that OpenAI is trying to sell it as. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. There's lots of research into how to get rid of these hallucinations, but fundamentally, in order to address it, you're going to need some fundamental changes in the way that these models are designed. I mean, it's just
mathematical, right?
No.
Okay, got you. So let's move to copyright and writing. So we've seen also that ChatGPT is using whatever was available on the internet, even though some material has copyright, right? But OpenAI didn't really ask for permission for the authors of these materials to be profiting from them, right? Another point is that many people use ChatGPT to create things, right? So who's the author of those creations? I play a little bit with ChatGPT, and I asked him, I suppose that I was a marketing professor, I was making an assignment, and I asked someone to give me 2 value propositions for a determined business in Peru. And ChatGPT gave me 2 options for a value proposition for a store of cakes there in the coast of Peru. I translated so people can see it here in English. So who could be, who do you think is the author of this work? I bet a lot of marketing companies are using this in business as well to generate ideas. I'm not saying that they will use it exactly, right? But that's a conversation that needs to be had, I think.
Are you asking me, Leslie?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so this is actually one of the biggest conversations that we have right now regarding ethics and laws. And that's the difference of this, because these stuff are not perfectly defined right now. And that's a kind of a problem, because, laws and regulations, they are not coming before right and wrong. we first do something wrong over and over again, and that's the time that the society and other people would say enough is enough, let's just make some laws and regulations about this and control it. So these stuff are kind of new to us in aspect of using the generative, I mean, not the AI itself. So these are kind of new, and these are the new conversations that we are kind of shaping to find the legal responsible for that specific text. Because you can always say that this is not generated by me, this is the computer which is saying such a thing, and I just telling you what the computer said. But again, that's a question. If you are driving a car and you have an accident, are you going to be responsible or the car? So some people are saying, no, this is the driver question that you are actually answering anyway. You need to have the control. And then what about self-driving cars? How about if you are sitting in a self-driving car and then you have an accident? Then who is going to be responsible, the self-driving car or you? So this is just taking us to this very basic conversation that we have right now. And again, that's the concern of all of those tech giants saying that, hey, maybe we can just stop a little bit and think about this process. And we need to be very clear about these legal liabilities that would emerge, because right now we are seeing, the wrongdoings happening over and over again, but we didn't know before. As Will said, we didn't know that we can have, we can put voice on something and that thing can talk with people. We cannot, we didn't know that we can have deep fakes. And then AI can, so now we have it, and now we are developing laws and regulations. So one of those things that you are saying about, using this, I would say right now, this is case by case, of course, but people who are using this data and information, generating text, they are responsible towards the content. Of course, that's going to be something from their side. So they are to a huge degree responsible of what they are saying, and they have responsibilities for that.
Interesting view, which I agree with. So let's talk about the development of the students. In general, ChatGPT, I'm not talking about Khan's Academy AI, ChatGPT, you think is going to help develop creativity? Do you think that at some point or certain students will stop, making this critical thinking, and they would get or see their knowledge stuck? Or in general, society is going to be a slowdown on the new work, the new ideas, the genuinely new ideas that the world creates?
I think we are going to have both sides. Of course, we are going to see people who can perfectly use this for individual or organizational development in the best possible way, fostering innovation, having more creativity, coming up with new ideas, having better practices in the area of human resources, strategy, or anything else. And also students who can use it for best of their knowledge to learn more. And on the other hand, we are also going to have people who are going to use it in a wrong way, if you are defining it wrong in this way, saying that they are going to replace it with their own brain and saying that, okay, I can just handle my assignment, my homework in 5 minutes without even realizing that, that was there for you to develop your brain to somehow think about it. So it's going to be both. So it really depends on our societies and our policymakers at the education, at the ministry, and also as a nation, to see which one we want to actually do, which one we want to engage. And I can see that, of course, right now, Stanford University has a big project with the US government. Here, U of T, of course, started the same thing. So something that I can see is that, again, we are going to see some extremely interesting progress in developed countries. But on the other hand, we are going to see lacking and, of course, some wrongdoing and, of course, some inefficiencies in developing and poor nations, because that will take a lot of time for them to understand the importance of this topic. And it will take a decade or even more than that, of course, for them to catch up. So again, I think it's going to be both sides.
So we're running out of time. We're going to try to close the conversation really quick. So I just want to mention also that in the internet, there is publicly available data, but the fact that the data is in there doesn't mean that it's public data, and that the users of these blogs, websites, communities have given consent to use their thoughts, their personal data to be used by OpenAI and other firms to profit, right? So that's an important point that I want to highlight here. So, and also say that I was recently in a workshop developed by the Vector Institute. And surprisingly, I realized that many scientists didn't realize that. The good news is that the Vector is leading the research forward to create algorithms that don't depend on the internet data, right? That they can use smaller data sets, private data sets, to train the models and don't fall into privacy rights violations. So let's move on and talk about other risks, Professor Amir. If you can tell us more about which are the other risks, maybe you can choose what are the two most important risks that you see are coming with generative AI right now, because as you said, governments, institutions need to build the frameworks, but governments are very slow. Institutions need to think it through, right? And the technology is already out there, is already rapidly evolving. So what do you think are the most important risks for society?
I mean, it's not really difficult to think about the risks that we are facing for that. And these are just risks and opportunities at the same time. So I would say student and educator relationship and that kind of human touch about thoughts, about ideas is the first thing at the stake. For me as a sociologist, I think that would be the first thing, and the impact that it can have on the behavior and of course the relationships that we have as educator and also the students. The bias risk, algorithmic, and Will is expert in that. Algorithmic bias is going to be another one about how these algorithms are going to be designed to deal with the, different issues of bias. That's going to be another one. Privacy issues are going to stand at the very top, and we already started that conversation in the Office of the Commissioner, Privacy Commissioner of Canada, that how it can actually somehow put the privacy of the students and of course privacy of those people that their information is available at risk. So we need to be very clear about that. Issues of privacy already started. We are talking about it. We are trying to somehow shape it. But when I'm saying we, it's just that this is Canada. We are talking about North America, most progressive nations on the planet. And of course, they just started. Now you can imagine about the timeline in other countries. And that's the scary part. Maybe, the emotional well-being of people and having the emotional intelligence also in place. These are all kind of risks and opportunities at the same time, I would say, when we talk about these kind of issues. But we are at the very earliest stage of understanding or somehow, addressing those risks. I know that I'm out of time, but just to add this, Leslie, that most of the people are talking about mitigating the risk, maybe deleting or somehow not facing with them. That's not possible, even from the mathematical perspective. You will never reach zero, or you cannot be 100% sure about anything. Zero is not a real number. But, the thing is, even when we are saying, fastening the seatbelt in a car, it doesn't mean it's going to save us from, from being dead or, being injured in an accident. We are just reducing the possibility of being injured or being killed in an accident. So no one can claim that we can mitigate the risk. So it's not that question. It's just that how can we build these seatbelts, hopefully to manage the moral, let's say moral hazard, to manage, the cheating, to manage coping, to manage all of these issues. And of course, at the very top, education to children, education to people, young people about what we mean by integrity, something that we are shouting for many years, is going to be the most important one. Mitigating the risk of everything, not possible, but at least controlling it.
Yeah, I think that's a very smart takeaway, Professor. Thank you for that. We have 3 questions we haven't answered. We're going to answer to each of the people that have asked the questions after the event. We're going to email them. I want to invite you to watch this video about the invisible computer. It's on TED. It will be on the email that we will send on Monday with the recording of this conversation. We don't have the time to watch it right now, but it has big questions for you. Do you want your AI to see what you do, feel what you feel, and listen all what you say? That's a big question that you have to do because these devices are coming very soon and they are invisible. So
the future will not.
We're going to close the conversation with a talk from Geoffrey Hinton. I'm going to cut the video because of timing. Let's just have 2 more minutes to complete the video.
It sounds like AI will bring many important benefits. But you have expressed concern about the current pace of innovation. Why?
Okay, so for like 50 years, I thought that, well, for 49 years, in order to make digital models better, we needed to make them work more like the brain. So I kept looking at things the brain does and the digital models don't, like rapidly changing connection strengths in a temporary way. And that can make the digital models better. And very recently, I realized that because these digital models have this kind of hive mind where when one agent learns something, all the other agents know it, they might actually already be better than biological intelligence. And so I kind of completely flipped my opinion from the idea it's going to be a long time before they can do everything the brain does. It's going to be 30 to 50 years before they're better than us, which is what I thought for until very recently. A few months ago, I suddenly realized maybe they're already better than us. They're just smaller. And when they get bigger, then they'll be smarter than us. And that was quite scary. It was a sudden change of opinion that instead of being 30 to 50 years, it was 5 years to 20 years, something like that.
So that was the realization of the godfather of AI, talking about generative AI, right? That has huge amount of data. So now we're going to look.
And for that risk,
we're going to talk see what is his opinion about the role of government. One second.
All of those are well-known risks that I'm not talking about. It's not that I don't think they're important. I think they're probably even more urgent. But lots of other people talk about those risks. The risk I'm talking about is the risk these things will get smarter than us and eventually take over. And for that risk, there may be something governments can do because nobody wants that. Well, if you exclude these superintelligences, no people want that. And so all the different governments ought to be able to agree, they ought to be able to work together on preventing that because it's in their interests. And that's happened before. Even during the Cold War, the US and Russia could work together on trying to prevent there being a global nuclear war, because it was so bad for everybody. And for this existential threat, it should be possible for everybody to work together to limit it, if it's possible to prevent it. I don't know whether it's possible to prevent it, but at least we should be able to get international collaboration on that particular threat, the existential threat of AI taking over. One thing I think should be done is wherever this stuff's being developed, particularly these big chatbots, governments should encourage the companies to put a lot of resources, as these things are getting more and more intelligent, to doing experiments to figure out how to keep them under control. So they should be sort of looking at how these things might try and escape and doing empirical work on that and put a lot of resources into that. Because that's the only chance we've got. Before they're super intelligent, we can maybe do experiments and see what's going to go wrong. And I'm strongly of the belief you need empirical data on this. You just can't have philosophers and politicians and legislators making up rules.
And with that, we're going to close our talk. So what is next for AI? So AI is already in the works of being regulated by the European Union, who has the most comprehensive framework right now. However, it would take about 2 years to become a law. Then we have Canada, who has created a framework with 6 principles for AI development moving forward. and has also announced that it would take 2 years to create the legislation on that. Finally, we have the US also creating an AI Bill of Rights with 5 principles, and an independent institute that has been advancing AI for many years and is very prominent in North America. The Vector Institute has defined 6 principles to make sure that AI is developed responsibly and it benefits the planet. So one of these principles, and I think is the most important, is that AI should benefit humans and the planet. And I think that summarizes what AI should do. And companies should focus on not on the profits, but also consider that the society has to benefit from the products that they built. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you, Professor Will and Professor Amir. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and hear your open-minded ideas. And with that, I also want to thank the PC team who has worked really hard to make this possible, including ChatGPT, who helped me translate the whole presentation. And thank you. Have a great weekend. You
As
will receive
artificial intelligence becomes more advanced.
You will receive.
the end of the month.
You will receive this video on Monday, and with a small survey to receive some feedback from you. And the people that made questions that couldn't have them answer, we will send you the answers over email. Thank you again, and have a great week.
Thank you so much. Have a great week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Professor. Bye, Professor.